Welcome to FitBody Lifestyle, the show where we dive deep into the world of fitness, health, business, relationships, and the art of living a balanced life. I'm Jami.
And I'm Greg, and we're here to give you the benefit of our experiences in the fitness and bodybuilding industry, the corporate world, running a business, personal development, and building healthy relationships.
Whether you're sweating it out in the gym, hustling in your business, or seeking balance in your everyday life, you're in the right place.
So lace up those sneakers and grab that water bottle, and let's get ready to transform our minds, our bodies, and our lives.
Welcome back to another episode of FitBody Lifestyle, where I get to do all of the introductions. I'm just kidding. I'm excited.
That is a behind baseball thing that I don't think people appreciate, is that we're discussing who's going to intro each episode, like right here, right now.
Yeah, as it's counting down.
We have a countdown
5, 4, 3, 2,
timer.
you, me. Yeah, so that's why we're always laughing when we start. I think this is going to be such a great episode because we're going to talk about the peaking process during peak week, as well as nailing the show day look. Those things go really, really closely hand in hand. So I think we have a lot to talk about on this subject here with my partner in crime, the love of my life here, Greg D.
And I thank you, my love.
GDB.
And I love you, JDB. And I love you, and thank you for having me here today, I guess.
I don't think
for
you had an
allowing
option.
me in your life. Well, it is an option. And I mean, I choose you every day, and I appreciate you choosing me every day. So what I would say at the outset, and I think our intent for this is, look, we're going to talk about some science stuff, some peaking strategies. One of the things that I think we may incorporate going forward, depending on how this episode goes and how your comments and feedback go, hint, hint, as to what I say at the end, is maybe to incorporate peaking strategies when we have guests on and talk about how they peak. And so this may be a recurring topic depending on the feedback that we get to this and the response.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, there's been episodes where we've talked, to other athletes about specifics on this, but I agree with you. This might be something good to integrate, even if we just ask them what their favorite peaking strategy is or something
or
like that.
I think peaking is what we are going to do is to present to you an approach, or kind of like some variations of an approach. When I tell you that there are different peaking strategies, I mean, there are different peaking strategies. There are as many as there are pebbles on the beach. Well, maybe not that many, but there are a lot. Everybody does things a little bit different.
Not the same thing works for everyone either. So just that's an important caveat that we'll
go through. Not the same approach works for every athlete each time.
Exactly.
Because every peak is different. And that's one of the things that I would say as we go into this topic, just kind of a few ground rules is that, one, every peak for every athlete is different. The body will change, and there's a difference between a peak that you're doing for your first show of the season, especially if you've taken if an athlete has taken a year and a half to build and they're just now coming back, that peak is going to look different than if they're peaking after a 3-month break. If they are doing back-to-back shows, those peaks are going to look different week to week, or can look different. I'm not going to say they will look different. They can look different. There are a lot of things that influence peaking. So what our approach and our intent here is today is to give you the concepts behind it, what we look at, how we approach it, and
things to look out for.
Yes,
because the number one thing that I wanted to talk about to kind of watch out for as more of a broad take on peaking in general is less is more. Mm-hmm. I feel like the number one thing I see mess up a peak or have an athlete, like I can't tell you how many times I have an athlete tell me, man, I'm changing coaches because I looked way better a week out from my show than I did on show day, or I looked way better the day after my show than I did on show day. And so that is a peaking issue. Like, the peaking means that you hit your best look at the right time. So in order to do that, number one is we need control. So if we're changing 5 or 10 different variables during peak week, as I've experienced, in my past life as a competitor with certain coaches, and I see this, oftentimes with coaches where they're changing water protocols up and down, they're changing sodium up and down, they're changing carbs up and down. They might be, changing it. There could be a whole variety of things. And then the difficult piece of that is if things start to turn the wrong way, it's hard to know which variable. And, while each peak is different and each athlete can be different from peak to peak. At the same time, you also are learning the body, that particular body. So there are common threads. So, we can, I'm always looking at the history of that athlete as well as what's currently going on with the athlete and then modifying things to do that. So, historical data is really useful. And at the same time, we have to make sure that we don't fall into, okay, I'm just going to do it the same way every time and expect the same result, because that might not be the case.
Yeah, and what I would there's a military saying that I've shared with you before, which is a perfect plan delivered too late, or a good plan delivered on time is better than the perfect plan delivered too late. And where that comes into play here is this: is that, man, I've seen protocols where coaches will employ, a veritable algorithm of of everything that they're controlling during peak week. And for some athletes that works, that precision works. But if an athlete's not going to follow it because they can't, because they won't or can't, whether it's because they're depleted, whether it's because they have so much going on in their life, whatever, that perfect plan, if it's not executable, is not a perfect plan. The perfect plan is the one that the athlete will follow, and we always joke with this about what's the best workout you can do. The best workout you can do is the workout that you will do. So when part of the peaking strategy as we go into this with maybe some mistakes is you've got to make that assessment of the athlete, of where they are, how well do you know their body, how much familiarity do you have with their adherence, do they struggle with certain aspects. So if you start manipulating certain details in their protocol and they don't follow them, well, that manipulation of that protocol is not going to be effective because they're not going to follow it. So if somebody's not going to follow something, and that's on them, that's on the athlete, but you as the coach, your job is to get them to a particular outcome, to a particular look that you think is most suitable for that particular show. That's the goal. So, and to peak at that right moment. So I think you've got to assess at some point at the outset, what's the level of it? Who is the athlete I'm dealing with? What's their history? How compliant are they? How adherent are they? Where are they mentally and emotionally at this point in their time? How able are they to follow the certain things? And one other thing that I think we'll get to this at some point, but I say this now because it's relevant, is when do you pull the plug? When do you say, look, this peak is we're just not there. Your body's not
I think
responding.
that could be a whole nother episode.
Yeah.
That could be a whole nother
Fair
episode.
enough.
Yeah. So thinking about the variables coming into peak week, one of the things I would start out by assessing, we're coming into our peak week, and are we behind a little bit in terms of conditioning? So are we maybe not quite as lean as we would like to be quite yet? That's not the ideal situation, but it happens sometimes. And you talked about
Well, why don't you
adherence.
describe what an ideal is, what an ideal thing is, and then first maybe give that baseline. What's an ideal peak in terms of somebody being
Can I
ready?
finish
Oh
my
yeah,
thought?
sure.
Cool.
Go, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Sure.
Let me finish my
Okay.
thought, because I'm kind of right in the middle.
Okay.
So I'm assessing, and based on, and the way I'm describing this is, if the look that I have coming into peak week, I know is not quite as lean a look as I need to for stage, that's something I'm going to consider. If I'm coming into peak week and I am nail on the head, it's the beginning of peak week. The look is exactly what we want for stage. And I'm not going to go into the details of what that look is going to be, because it's going, we did another episode not too long ago about choosing your division and what level of conditioning and muscularity and all of that. That depends on your division, and it depends on, the level you're at and the look you're going for. So, but you have to know what you want to look like on stage. Otherwise you're definitely not going to hit the mark, So if I'm coming into to peak week with the look I know I want for stage, that's going to be a different peaking strategy. If I have a situation where that metabolism has really sped up, and this happens a lot of times when you're doing back-to-back shows. So at that point, maybe I'm having a little bit of trouble keeping the fullness because maybe I'm a little leaner than I want that person for stage. That's going to be a different peaking strategy. So I just kind of wanted to introduce that first of all, because that's going to be one of the things that's going to drive all the rest of the variables going on during the peak week protocol.
And what about a 2-week peak versus a 1-week peak? Any thoughts on that in terms of what you favor? I know you prefer to peak people that, I mean, in a prep, so a 12-week prep, 16-week prep. I mean, some people peak people for 2 weeks, some people peak them for one.
I've
No?
never heard of
Okay.
somebody peaking
Well,
somebody for 2 weeks before.
I
So
should
that
say
one's new to me.
starting the peak week before the week before.
That's not peak week.
Okay, fair enough. Okay.
So
Sorry.
if you're in the week
Yeah.
before, then you're still making adjustments to the physique as you are every single week
That's really
of
the
the
question.
entire prep. When we talk about peak week, there are specific things that are going to happen as you get closer to show. And quite honestly, like a lot of times those variables don't even start changing till 3 or 4 days out from the show. So 2 weeks out from the show, I would not start what I consider peaking someone. Of course, I'm making adjustments based on what that person looks like. Say they're already lean enough, then I'm going to start increasing food, decreasing cardio. Say they're not lean enough, we're 2 weeks out, then we're going to push more cardio. We're going to create more of a deficit so that way we make sure we're getting as close to the mark as we can, as quickly as we can, so we can better control the peak, which is then going to happen during the
week before
5
the
to
show.
7 days prior to the show. I mean, quite honestly, I don't even really start peak week until 5 days out from the show. So I would never do a 2-week peak. It's just not, you're really not in that window where the types of manipulations that we're going to talk about on this show make sense.
Thanks. And I'm sorry, I phrased that question very inartfully. So that's thank you for cleaning that up. Okay. So then where do we go from here? And maybe start that question of what if you could paint the picture for an ideal peak, what would that picture look like?
So again, like the ideal peak is going to vary, and that's why I wanted to talk about, the different, variables that are going to exist, kind of introducing, if we know that we've still got a little bit of body fat to pull off and we're 1 week out from the show, we may have to crank up intensity to work on, dropping that last little bit of body fat. It may be one of those things where, really right even up to the show day, we're still pushing. The thing to take into the thought process here in this particular situation, and I really want to get into the sodium and water manipulation because that's going to be really important. But the thing is that in this particular instance, you have to be careful of inflammation. So if we're continuing to push to drop that body fat and we're, continuing to keep cardio high, at some point you got to back it down because you're going to, kind of cut off your nose to spite your face. You're working to get that body fat off, but then you're creating so much inflammation from pushing so hard that then you might actually kind of come in looking a little puffier and more inflamed than you want to. So even if I have somebody who I know could be a little bit leaner, and there are situations where this makes sense. I think I gave this example on a prior podcast. I had an athlete, we were shooting for nationals. We were going to do our warm-up show 4 weeks prior. I didn't want to peak her for that warm-up show 4 weeks out because I wanted her best to be on stage at nationals. So I brought her in, not quite as lean as we were going to be at nationals on purpose. So therefore that peak needed to be a little bit different. We pushed cardio as long as we possibly could, but then we started to titrate it down about 3 days out so that by show day, the body was rested, it wasn't inflamed, and we could bring our best on that day. It wasn't our best because nationals was a lot better because we at that point had 4 more weeks to continue to work on conditioning and nail that down. So there are situations where you would even purposefully bring somebody in maybe not quite as lean as they're ultimately going to need to be at their very best. So that's one example.
And I think maybe if we're putting a topic or theme on that, it's really more the strategy for the show, for the competition season, because when we have an athlete, I mean, we're not just thinking about the individual. I mean, it depends. If it's an individual who's just doing one show, then that's one strategy for peaking because it's just one show. If they are going to be doing multiple shows and there's a target show that's not the immediate show, then it's a different timeline planning than what you would do for somebody who's just doing one show a year.
Right. And then if I have that person who looks great, we're a week out, this is exactly how we want to look, it's almost more difficult sometimes maintaining that look because, if they've been dropping, then you're going to need to bring up their food and or down their cardio to make sure, and you got to watch it really closely. So, with us, people are checking in every day on peak week, I mean, that should be the case, with your coach. You should be checking in so that that real time modification of what's going on can happen. If you're if you're somebody who's like already too lean, things are speeding up and you're coming in even more so. Like, a lot of times I'll have people even check in more than once in a day because, we're really making sure that we're not getting behind during peak week. You don't want to, get to the day before the show or 2 days from the show and you're playing catch up. You're not going to be able to.
Right.
Without, of course, looking bloated too. Because if you got to keep pushing food on show day, then a lot of times the athletes, they just feel so full, they can't hold their waist tight. So that's not the ideal situation. Ideally, we'll want to catch it early enough to start pushing the food. And we would call that front loading, so maybe somebody's a little bit too lean coming into peak week, their metabolism just started kicking into gear. So we want to start loading more food in the front end of the week so that by the time we get to show day, we're able to kind of taper that down a little bit. And that way they're not feeling too full. And another point, if we've got an athlete that doesn't have the smallest waist or maybe has some digestive issues and they get constipated easy, which a lot of athletes do during peak week. These are all things to consider because you want to not have to overfeed that person on
Right.
show day. Otherwise, they're going to have a hard time holding that
Well,
tummy
and
tight.
I mean, I think you're saying this variable, but I'll say it a little bit differently is you've had a 12-week, 16-week prep, whatever it is, and this final week now, if your food has been very low, but then now you're at that point where you're over conditioned and we're trying to push a little bit more food, the body has, the metabolism has slowed down. And so the digestive system has slowed down. If you start pushing a whole bunch of food too soon, the body's ability to manage that food is difficult. So starting that food push,
Depending on the person.
depending on the person,
Yeah.
right? Some people don't have that issue.
Some people start
do.
burning through it faster and some
That's
people
right.
slower. And that's
That's
where
right.
having historical data on the individual too, that's where that can be helpful.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the biggest issues I see too is like the pictures and videos being sent to coaches, and I really encourage athletes to do their very best to like have some sort of light with them, especially, if you're traveling to a show or you're going to get there early and you don't have as much control over the environment, you got to be set up so that, if your coach is not there with you and you're sending pictures that you can send them good pictures, because I've gotten to a show before and then seen striations that I couldn't see in the pictures and videos that the person was sending me. And so now all of a sudden we are playing catch up because they are leaner than they looked. So, just making sure that what you are sending, is very representative of what you look like so that, the coach can make. I've even seen athletes edit their photos for their coaches.
I know, I don't understand that.
Like that does not help your
That's not
coach.
help,
Like
yeah.
you want them to see your flaws because that way they can do their best to minimize your flaws and maximize, the good aspects.
One of the things that I would say to people that we do during show week is if we're at a show and we're covering an athlete for another coach or another coach is covering one of our athletes for that matter, we'll video them. Most times we'll get on a FaceTime call so we can see them in real time. We'll have the coach or we will video them and then we'll send that video along and we will usually say in the video, they look tighter than they do in person, or in the video, they look softer than they did in person.
Or I'm seeing some
That's right.
striations in the upper glutes
That's
that
right.
you can't see in the video. So yeah, it really does help, and we do that for each other since we do have a team of coaches and usually there'll be a coach on site. So if it's not me on site, then I can get that feedback from a coach. So if you don't have that kind of situation, having a friend or family member, that understands, what you're looking at or you're explaining to them, then that way they can communicate what they're seeing,
Yeah,
in
what am I
comparison to
seeing? What am I seeing versus the video?
Right.
Real life.
Right.
And so, just a couple tips here as we're talking about this, because I don't know if we talked a little bit about check-in photos. If you're videotaping or videotaping, I don't know why I keep saying video. If you're videotaping, if you're videoing this, make sure your camera is on the highest setting, so 4K if you're using an iPhone. If you don't know how to do that, that's in your settings, or you can Google it and to figure out how to set it. But put it on 4K because that's going to give you the highest resolution image. If you're using still photographs, use the back camera, not the front camera. And the way to figure out whether you're in frame is simply put a reference point on the ground, whether you're using tape, a jar, something to mark where you should stand. Fill the frame with your body. I can't tell you how frustrating it is to get videos or
right,
still
and the person's
pictures.
filling like half
Yeah,
the frame and
the person looks like they're in the Wizard of Oz and they're or not Wizard of Oz, Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory, and they're an Oompa Loompa because they're so far back in the picture that you can't see them. So
right. And by the time we expand it to be able to see them better, then
lose
it's
the
lost
detail.
resolution.
Yeah, we lose the details. So good lighting is a must. I know Jamie personally likes ambient lighting, like
Natural light.
natural lighting. I personally prefer the direct light because I think that better replicates what the stage is going to be. But I also understand her perspective because you can see more detail in the natural light than sometimes you can if it's a direct light or a ring light or something that you're using. But when you're using a ring light or any other external light, if it has a temperature setting, play with that a little bit, because sometimes if you are getting really washed out, you need to turn down the temperature setting to make it a little bit warmer. And you'll see that on the temperature. It's usually turning the temperature setting up to get more warmth in that image so that you're showing a little bit better. But take a little bit of time to do that, because those check-in photos, those check-in videos are not just important during your prep, they're very important during peak week, because coaches are making decisions off of that look.
Yes.
One more thing I would say: consistency. As much as you can, wear the same suit, pose in the same spot. A lot of athletes I see are using backdrops, which are very helpful because they do frame the body a little bit better from the back. But as much consistency, so you're delivering the same product from the same position, from the same angle every time.
Right.
Sorry.
Absolutely. No, it's good. It's good information. And I think we've covered that too in some other episodes, but
Good
it definitely
reminders.
is good to, because if your coach can't see what you look like, they're not going to modify you properly, and it's not going to be the result. So this is really important. So one of the other big mistakes I see made is over manipulation of sodium water. So I really want to dive in this a little bit, and help people understand, because I think there's like a weird fear or stigma around salt. So let's just talk
And
about,
water for, well, yeah,
well, yeah,
yeah.
it's both, but talking specifically about salt, because I'm talking about even just lifestyle people. They think,
Yep.
oh, if I eat too much salt, I'm going to be fat. No, that's not how it works. It's not a calorie thing. What sodium does is it shuttles the water, or it shuttles fluid into the cells. If I don't have enough sodium to do that, then the water, or the fluid's going to sit more subcutaneous, and I'm not going to get that nice round full bubbly look to the muscle. So it's really important to have enough sodium coming into a show. And I've seen coaches that will cut sodium. I've even had coaches do this with me, cut sodium 3-4 days out, or even sooner.
We're usually increasing sodium.
And you're not going to get that pop to the
Yeah.
muscle. So what you said is absolutely true. We're usually increasing sodium. Now, you can have too much sodium.
Yep.
So this doesn't mean go ham. You need to understand your body and what your body can tolerate. Some people are more sodium sensitive than other people are. So there's going to be some trial and error
And
with this.
it's that balance, right, between extracellular water and intracellular water.
Exactly.
And what we're trying to do is what we are doing is manipulating that flow so that we are getting the most fluids and the most nutrients, because sodium transports nutrients as well. It's not just the fluids, but the sodium handles the water balance between what's inside the cell and what's outside the cell, but it also helps get the nutrients to the cell that it needs to function.
Right. And I know we've talked about this before too, is that, the muscle is the container. So, you only have so much tissue to fill. And that's where if you go overboard with it, then you can get what we call a spilled
Spillover.
over look,
Yeah.
which looks very similar to a flat look. So when we talk about flat, there's not enough fluid intracellular in the muscle, and then it'll give that kind of like smoother, sort of like blurry look, where you're not getting the lines around the muscle and the pop. The same thing if you go overboard with it and it's spilling to, there's not the muscle's completely full, but now we're putting more sodium, more water in, we're going to get that smoother, sort of
I've
washed
seen
out
you
look.
test that with athletes, where you'll go to the skin and you'll take a piece of the skin and you'll rub it between your fingers. And if you're feeling a really gritty, grainy feel, that's fat. If you're feeling just smoothness, but they look smooth, that's just extracellular water.
Right. And what a lot of times people will do is, say the person's not as lean as they need to be, then they start to cut sodium, they start to cut water in order to look a little bit leaner, which it can help to some extent. If you've got somebody who's got very dense muscle, maybe they're a little more muscular for their division, you can get away with this a lot more than you can if you've got somebody who's got less muscle tissue,
Yep.
because they're, and I was one of these, back in my day, when I was doing figure, I mean, my feedback was always that I was too muscular. So I would purposefully come in a little bit flat in order to look more comparable to what they were looking for. So, I mean, there's a time and
We
place
talked
for
about that with,
everything.
I think, Adair. If you haven't watched the episode with Adair Lebrecht, who has a lot of dense muscle, that was the strategy. We kept getting the feedback from her is that she's too dense, she's too dense, she's too dense. And so part of the strategy for her peak looked markedly different than anybody else's because she has that dense muscle tissue that we had to flatten her out because when the dense muscle tissue would fill, it gave her too hard, too muscular of a look, and that's not what we needed for for the category that she competes in, which is bikini.
Exactly. And so, I mean, I would say that's the more rare
It
scenario,
is.
yet it happens, like you
Mhm.
said. I mean, and we do have those people, so these are all things to consider. Usually what I will start doing is about a month out from the show, I'll have people get very specific on logging anything they're intaking that has sodium. So I always tell people sauces, seasoning, supplements, everything that has
If it
sodium
goes in your mouth,
and
log it.
and it has sodium, it needs to
Yeah.
go in there, because what we want to know is what is your total sodium intake for the day. So say, for example, you've been taking BCAAs and they are flavored. So a lot of times we will cut artificial flavors and sweeteners and things during peak week. Usually for me, I usually like to cut those on a Monday. So say they've been doing the BCAAs and they cut them. Well, let's say those BCAAs that they were taking every day had 500 milligrams of sodium. Unknowingly, they just cut 500 milligrams of sodium out of their diet. I may not know about that because maybe they didn't tell me they were taking these BCAs because they hadn't been logging them. So this is something where, there even things that, you may not think about because they had no
Mhm.
calories, they had no macros, but they still had sodium. So this is where I'll tell people 4 weeks out, go through, log everything that has sodium. That way, if we pull something out, then we know
We
we
know
need
how
to
to
now
replace it.
replace
Yeah.
that. What I like to do in an ideal situation is I have people order salt packets, just because they're already pre-weighed, pre-measured. I like the
Point
ones that,
6 gram.
yeah, I like the ones that actually the zero point 0.5 or zero
Oh,
point
point 0.5.
0.6
Yeah.
of a gram, because it's just it's a little easier to manipulate. And that way, if say, you were doing a BCA, we pulled it out because we didn't want to have any artificials. Now we need to make sure we're replacing that 500 milligrams or 300 or whatever it was with the salt. So that way we're keeping it very consistent. Then during peak week, depending on the look that I'm wanting, most people are needing to fill out, because we're typically depleting on the front end and then starting to fill back out. That's where we start to kind of increase that sodium. So usually I'll start with a little bit smaller bump, depending on the individual and how sodium sensitive I've determined them to be. It might be anywhere from 100 milligrams to 400 milligrams the first day. I'll see how their body does with that. If I'm like, wow, that didn't even make a dent in it. Okay, now I'm going to go up, maybe I'll double it or, triple it, depending on, again, the look I'm going for and what I'm seeing. And then I'll do that every day coming into the show until I've got it nailed. If, I do a bump up of sodium and I'm like, they're starting to look a little bit spilled over, then I'll pull back. So that's where that monitoring from day to day is really important to make sure. For me, I keep water consistent all the way through. So I manipulate salt rather than water. The only time that I'll manipulate water typically would be on a show day. Let's say we're starting to look a little bit not quite as dry as I want the person to look, and they've been drinking, let's say, 5 liters of water a day. Maybe on show day, I'll cut them to 3 liters,
Yep.
or even 1 liter if I want to get them even drier, and depending on what I want them to look like. So that's where, maybe I'll start to manipulate water. But I find that for most people, keeping water pretty consistent is a great idea. Back in my day, there was we would do these wild manipulations. I mean, I've had preps where they had me drink 3 gallons of water and then 2 gallons of water, and like I would literally feel like I was drowning. There is such thing as too much. You're then leaching minerals from your body. It's just, I haven't found this to be a effective
Well,
approach for me.
and when you talk about it, you say back in your day with the water manipulation, this is now. I mean, it's not uncommon
Yeah,
for us
people
to,
are still
yeah,
using these
we'll talk
techniques.
to athletes, and again, I I be very clear on this. We are not saying never. Okay, we are not saying don't do. We are saying this is our approach, and we have a very similar approach. The only area that I differ from is I really like to condition the athletes I work with their sodium consistency throughout, even in the off season. And the reason I like to do that is I feel like it's a muscle that you build when you're used to having that sodium as something that you're looking at, even when you're not in a prep or not in a peak week. Then when we get to prep and get to peak week, it's just something easier to manipulate. But it's different for everybody, because people that I don't stress that with, they will be fairly consistent with their sodium anyway. So, but
Yeah,
we're,
and I
yeah,
think that's a smart technique as well. And it, also depends on the level of
yep,
athlete that you're coaching. If I'm coaching a lot of my pro athletes, they're very consistent anyway. So, or if I have somebody that's stressing them out, like I don't want to over stress them,
fair.
because the way I look at it is for 4 weeks, it's not that difficult to be very, very specific. Whereas maybe, for 12 months or year round, doing that might stress somebody out. So, I mean, if somebody is comfortable continuing to do that, I agree that it's great not to have to figure it out at the last minute. Interested in changing your life or stepping on stage? Join FitBody Fusion today.
Experience the FitBody Fusion difference with tools, knowledge, and community support to reach your healthy and sustainable lifestyle.
We guide thousands on their fitness journeys, from seasoned athletes to those who are simply seeking a healthier life.
Our expert coaches provide personalized plans and unwavering support, empowering you to thrive.
FitBody Fusion is more than just training. It's a community. We understand the challenges of solo fitness journeys, which is why we foster a supportive environment where members encourage and motivate each other.
Join the FitBody Fusion community today and unlock your full potential.
Head to fitbodyfusion.com to sign up for a free consultation.
And do it today. So the other part was, but we see that where I was going with that was that we do see some athletes who are backstage and they're not drinking any water whatsoever. And even athletes that we have said, as Jami was giving the example, we may go from 5 liters to 3 liters or to 2.5 liters. Sometimes they think just because we're cutting water that they should not drink water. And then we'll see them then backstage, and one of the questions will come up like, have you drank any water? Because they're starting to look the detail's gone, and the detail's not gone because they're flat. They're flat because they don't
haven't
have
drank their water.
they haven't drank their water. They don't have the ability. Their body does not have the ability to push fluids and nutrients into their cells because
There are none.
There are none, right? So it's very important to drink your water. And just kind of as an aside, as we're talking about the importance of water, we get lab results all the time, and one of the almost common findings on blood panels is creatinine or the bun creatinine ratio being, or EGFR for your kidneys. We'll find those levels impacted, and comes to find out that the person hasn't drank water before they did their labs. Fasted labs do not mean no water. You should hydrate before your labs, just the same way that you want to hydrate during peak week.
Right. And we've gotten very specific for that reason,
Yep.
because you're right. If we tell people to sip, or we tell people, 1/4 of their normal water, and then, we talk to them later on and they haven't had any water. So we've gotten
They
to where
think
we're
1/4
getting.
of their water means, okay, I can drink this after the show. And it's like, no, we want you drinking. If you are consuming 5 liters throughout the day, we want you to consume 2.5 liters throughout the day. So meaning that you don't drink 2.5 liters in one sitting. You drink 2.5 liters. You'll drink 16 ounces here, 16 ounces there, 50 milliliters there, 50 milliliters there. You want to continue doing that the same way that you would just half of what you were doing if you were drinking 5
Right.
liters.
Which is a really good point that you brought up too, is, when you're doing your water, no matter what, no matter whether you're in peak week or not, you should be spreading it out.
Yeah.
Like I know people, I had to catch up on my water and I drank a half a gallon right before I went to bed and it kept me up peeing all night. Well, that really didn't do you any good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's in one in and out the other. You need to just stay hydrated throughout the day. So, I'd rather people get more sleep than pounding a half a gallon of water before bed because they got behind. So that's
Let's talk about food and programming your food for peak week.
talk about food,
Let's talk about food, baby.
Okay, so coming into peak week, some of the things, a lot of times gosh, this varies so much from person to person and situation to situation. Obviously, like I talked a little bit about, if you're behind the game, then you're still dieting pretty hard, depleting pretty hard. Protein's probably pretty high. Carbs and fats are on the lower side. Throughout peak week, we're typically going to start to lower protein a little bit. I like to do that just to help keep the waistline a little bit tighter. We're not building a ton of muscle during peak week. We're pulling back from training, especially towards the end of peak week. So we're going to go more to pump ups rather than tearing muscle down, because we want muscle fully recovered when we step up on stage. We're typically titrating down cardio to help reduce inflammation, like I had spoke about before. We're titrating down protein as we get closer, and depending
And
on
we're also titrating down protein because the elimination. It's harder for the body to process the protein for elimination than it is carbs. Fair or no fair?
so the thermal effect of protein is higher, because it does take more calories to burn, to process the protein
Okay.
versus the carbs and fats. That's not a big variable. It's a very,
Not the
very, very
thermogenic.
small.
I'm talking about digestion. So sometimes too much protein when
From a
your digestive
digestive
system.
standpoint, okay,
Yeah,
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 yeah. I
that's
mean,
what I
from
meant.
from
I'm
a
sorry.
digestive standpoint, yes, that can be a little bit. Yeah, we want to stick with foods that are easier to digest, so we keep that waist nice and tight. On show days, excuse me, on show day specifically is why I won't have as much protein,
Yeah.
because we're not building muscle. We want to keep that waist as tight as possible. For show day specifically, that's where I would say that comes into play more so. The one time I will keep a little bit more protein in is if the person's just super hungry and
Yeah.
they're having a hard time managing their appetite. I don't want to cut it down too much, because it is more satiating. So we have to, this is where we're kind of making sure we're taking into account all the variables like you had spoke about earlier. I want to make sure this is something my athlete can follow through on. So if I start cutting it down so much that they're voraciously hungry and then they go off track right before the show, that's not going to help me
No.
either. So something else to take into account. So some of this, we're going to talk more in general terms, because when we get to the specific individual, it may vary.
Yeah, and I think as we talk about this in general terms for peak week, some of the concepts that we've gone over and we've talked about, you and I, not now we're going to talk about them here, but is keeping food consistent, meaning don't introduce foods that you have not had up to peak week. So we've seen that where somebody will introduce some new food that they have not previously used, and they will have a reaction to it. Their body will react to it, and that's not a good thing. So peak week is not the week to experiment with new foods.
Right.
The other thing that
And if you have a coach that does this, that would be a red flag to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had people tell me about coaches have them eating. I had one athlete tell me French fries, and she hadn't had French fries her entire prep, and right before she went on stage, she ate that, and then she was just bloated.
Yeah.
And couldn't hold her waist tight. And I mean, I've heard this sometimes where they have coaches will have their athletes going on a scavenger hunt for something that's, go get a Rice Krispie treat, or go get just something completely random that they don't have with them, and they haven't eaten for their whole entire prep, and now all of a sudden they're stressed, so their cortisol levels are amped up, and they're running around looking for whatever this item is. I mean, that to me is a little bit of a red flag. You for the most part want to stick with foods that you digest well, that you're going to be okay eating.
we had an athlete that has historically a difficult time keeping their waist tight, and so one of the things that we've experimented with, and because we had another athlete who uses liquid carbs during peak week and has done so very effectively. We experimented with liquid carbs with this other athlete, but we didn't wait till peak week to do it. We did it like 6 weeks, 8 weeks out to see how their body reacted to it, and their body did not react very favorably to it. So we didn't incorporate that during peak week. It was a strategy, but it was a strategy that we didn't experiment with during peak week. And I think that's the overriding lesson here or concept is peak week is not the week to experiment with stuff.
Right.
And so if there's a theme that I would give you, it's that consistency during peak week is going to be your friend. And the phrase that I would give you, so in the Army it's called KISS, which is keep it simple, stupid. For our world, it's keep it simple, bikini competitor, KISS BC, because during peak week, the more consistency you can keeping foods consistent with what you know your body reacts and responds well to, keeping those portions and keeping, like, I know a lot, I will see some people with meals that have 8, 9, 10, 12 different, components to a particular meal. That's great during off season and can work during prep. During peak week, it just is additional variables that you have to manage. And it can become a little bit overwhelming because depending on where you're at in your peak, and again, this varies from person to person and peak to peak, but if you are depleted and your mental functioning is compromised to a certain piece, and that's the next topic we'll get to is mindset and emotional framework here. But as we're talking about nutrition, it overlays into that, which is if the more complex you keep it, the more opportunity there is for mismeasuring something or putting ingredients in that, oh my God, it's too many ingredients, it's too many to keep track of. Keep it simple, is
Yeah,
what I
I
would
mean,
say.
even changing brands,
Yep, can have an
we've
impact.
had and it have had issues with that before. So as much as you can stick to exactly what you've been doing all along, and then hey, you run out of something, you got to get some, just do your best to to keep it as consistent as possible, and plan for more. I think if people run out of anything with us, it's typically carbs because a
Yep.
lot of times, most of the time, our athletes are really where they need to be. So we're able to push carbs and really fill out those muscles during peak week. That would be the most common scenario for us. So a lot of times people, especially if they haven't competed with us before,
Right.
they'll pack and not pack enough carbs. So then they're, messaging on their, hey, does anybody have any extra rice or, or whatever, sweet potatoes or whatever it is. So, overpack, have enough of everything. But, that would be the final
And
macronutrient I didn't talk about yet is the carbohydrates and being prepared to do, we want to do as many as we can to get those muscles nice and full, unless we're purposefully not wanting to fill out completely.
and fats is probably another area that we should talk about a little bit
Oh
of
yeah, we didn't
using.
talk
Yeah.
about fats.
So
Good call.
you want to talk about fats?
Yeah, I mean, the fats are going to depend on the person. Fats can be really, first of all, I like to keep a certain amount in. Usually I'm, bringing up fats as I'm bringing up carbs slightly. Part of it is to help slow the digestion, especially since we're decreasing the protein as well. Um, if we get to show day and, or even, a couple days before show day and we're looking a little bit harder, a little bit leaner and drier than we want to look, then that's where a lot of times I'll amp up more fats because that's going to give a little bit softer look. It'll help to kind of give a little bit smoother, softer look. On show day, I mean, I've used this. I used it with one of our athletes that won the nationals at uh, a year or so ago. And she, the day just went so long that her body was burning through the food. So then I had her, what she had backstage was coconut oil. So she was doing tablespoons of coconut oil backstage just to make sure that we weren't starting to look too striated and too hard. So definitely uses for both fats and carbs depending on the physique and the look that we're going for.
And I just a couple of things. Instacart has kind of changed the landscape a little bit here for show prepping at whatever venue. If you're traveling to a venue, Instacart can be a game changer for getting your groceries. But if you cannot or do not want to use Instacart, our best suggestion here and our best tip is look at where the show is, find out where the grocery stores are that are close to that, find it out if there's a grocery store that you're familiar with that stocks the same items that you normally stock. Just do a little pre-planning on this. It will serve you well. I do think it's a good idea that like traveling with a bunch of food is hard and requires some planning, which is and it's fine. Some people do really well at that. If you don't want to travel with the food, make sure that you have a plan in place for when you get to the show venue. How are you going to stock your food? Do they have microwaves? Do they not have microwaves? Do you need to bring a hot plate? Do you not need to bring a hot plate? Most competitors that have done this have their routine and their their loadout kit, if you will. I almost this makes me think to back to the military with pre-combat checks, where we would lay everything out that we were putting in our backpack before we loaded it, just to make sure that we had everything. And I think that same thing applies with shows is make sure that you have what you need to have. Some athletes will get microwaves at a local Lowe's or Home Depot and bring those into the show with them because the venue doesn't have microwaves. So that's another strategy. But really start thinking about the things that you need to successfully peak, because as a coach, we're going to give you the things that you need, but you then need to figure out how you resource those things.
Right. Something else I wanted to bring up is, for most of the female divisions, especially, we're not looking for vascularity. We want to minimize vascularity. So I know I talked a little bit about, sodium and carbs. Those are two factors that can increase vascularity in some people. Everybody's a little bit different, and how lean they are may have an effect on it. And then just genetics, like some people
Yeah.
are naturally more vascular than others. I'm a very vascular person, and the leaner I get, the more vascular I get. So it's something I've always had to control. So it's another factor that, might influence the decision as to whether or not we go more fats versus carbs to help decrease vascularity. Sometimes we even have to watch out for adding sodium. Once we start to see that vascularity become an issue, then we may have to back off the salt a little bit. I did want to throw that in too.
And the fats that you have during show week, like liquid fats, I'm a big fan of MCT oil, olive oil, just because they're a little bit easier to consume, a little bit easier to digest. But you think about those fat sources, and again, go back to the rule that we talked about. And I do think this is a rule: is keep to the foods that your body works well with. That's not the time to experiment.
Right.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was about to say exactly what you're about to say. The last thing we wanted to talk about is the mental aspects
Yep.
and how they're going to affect the look. Go ahead.
Well, the mindset peak week is difficult, and again, this depends on the prep, and
the
where you're
person.
and where you're at in the person. So, some preps are very difficult. People have really gotten to low macros, high cardio, and
Or maybe they have life things going on
or
that
maybe they
were
have life things going
stressful.
on, a lot of things, and so that mental aspect of where you are in that week. What I would say is this: is that, and I'm not the first person to say this, but I will definitely foot stomp this, which is really focus on the execution of the day. It's really got to be about making every day your best day. So there's a phrase that maybe some people have heard in the gym, which is last set, best set. So you've got to treat every day on its own. This also gets into some survival training that I had, which is focus on today and what's right in front of you. If you're thinking about tomorrow or the next day or show day, you're going to miss things on the day that, if it's Monday of peak week, get through Monday. Focus on what you have to do for Monday. Don't worry about what Tuesday is going to be. Tuesday will come in due time. Focus on your execution for that day and really prioritize every moment of that day. Be present in the day. Focus on each meal that you're prepping. Focus on each rep that you're getting in the gym. And I do mean each rep, not each movement, each rep of each movement. Focus on those small details and really optimize your execution as much as you can. Give as much as you can. And when I say give as much as you can, 100% is going to look different every day. So during a peak week, Monday, you may be high energy, high cognition, high emotional engagement. Tuesday comes around, and for whatever reason, you're just down. You're dragging. You're having a difficult time getting moving. Your brain fog, energy low. You've got to be able to apply whatever 100% is that day, the same way that on the day that you have the high energy, high thing. It's really what I would say in mindset. The most important thing I can think of is be present in your day. Be present in your day and prioritize execution on that day. Just focus on that day.
I think that's great advice. The other thing, there's a couple other things I would think about um, in terms of minimizing stress, and depending on your life and what's most stressful to you. If there's certain people that you're around that you feel like, you've always got to take care of them, and it sometimes, having them, as much as you may love them around, sometimes it might be having your kids, it might be having your spouse, it might be a certain friend that you love dearly, and that they're going to want they're going to want your attention during that
They're going to
time.
want to make it about them, not about you.
Right. So, I mean, I would encourage you to think about things like that so that you can minimize that stress. That might not be a person that you want to have with you when you go to the show, or maybe they come to see you on show day, but they're, maybe not staying in the room with you. I've had athletes that, even though their spouse is coming, they'll have them stay in a different room
Yep.
just so they can have some quiet, and others do much better with their spouse in the room. So, your own situation and what's going to be more or less stressful. I've had athletes that will plan so that they can have a couple days off during peak week leading up to their show. That gives them time to do the little things, to get their nails done, get their hair done, maybe have a little bit of downtime, nap time here or there, just to kind of help unwind and de-stress a little bit. That can be really helpful. If you're traveling to a show, if you can get there maybe a day earlier than absolutely have to, just to get settled in, get your hotel room all, set up, get any groceries that you need. I think a lot of times the high stress can come from not being prepared ahead of time, or being too compressed with your timelines so that you're running around and feeling like, chicken with your head cut off sort of thing, getting everything done. So if you're able to find ways to kind of slow things down so that you've got a little bit of breathing room, and then, making sure that anybody that you have surrounding you are going to be people that are, really helpful and that are going to make life easier, not be more of a drain or a strain. All those things can be really helpful. And then, if you start feeling yourself getting wound up, being able to reach out to your coach. I mean, a lot of times, I'll have people that I'm coaching during peak week, and I can just tell they're
Yeah.
stressing, and maybe I'll just get on a quick call and say, hey, what's going on? What's in your head right now? Oh my God, I just don't know if I'm going to be ready. I just don't know if I'm going to, this and that. And then we'll get a chance to kind of talk about that. Okay, where's this coming from? You look amazing. This is about bringing your best. You already look better today than you did at your last show. You've already won. Let's go in with that kind of energy, that kind of thought process, And it's kind of like that. Oh, you're right. You know what? I'm so proud of myself. And whatever happens, I'm bringing my very best to the stage. And it kind of just helps to calm the mind a little bit, because I mean, I have literally watched somebody's physique change in a matter of hours because they started stressing out, because they got in their head. So this is where, really being able to kind of relax and put yourself in the right mind frame and enjoy the process. That's where that can really pay huge dividends. Have fun, you
And
know?
and I will tell you this, I don't ever want my athletes to be ready for show day. I want them to be prepared for show day. And I've given this example about being prepared versus being ready, but being prepared means that you've done everything that you need to do. You've focused on the daily execution. You've hit your macros. You've followed your coach's advice. You're prepared. You are prepared. If you're prepared, then you're going to be fine. And the analogy I would give is, listen, if you're a parent out there, when your wife is pregnant, she's pregnant for 9 months, you're preparing. You're preparing everything. You're preparing the room. You're preparing the bassinet. You're the crib, vitamins, healthcare, all that stuff you've spent 9 months preparing. But when that little baby comes out, you ain't ready for that. You're not ready for that. You're not ready for when they hit 5 years old. You're not ready for when they hit puberty. You're not ready for any of that, but you can be prepared for that. Focus on your preparations, and readiness will take care of itself. You just need to focus on your preparations.
Right.
And what I would say, one other thing to add as a tip on this is, I know a lot of athletes like to use Airbnb, which is great, and it can provide a significant benefit to you, because the Airbnbs have microwaves, kitchenettes, and do your research on the Airbnb, because it's not uncommon for us to get at a show weekend and somebody's staying at an Airbnb and it wasn't what they put in the picture, or the picture, whatever it was. It just was not good. Do your research. Make sure that you're staying at a good place if you're going to stay off site. The host hotels are always going to be a little bit more convenient in terms of coming there for check-ins, for the athlete registration, for all those things. And you got to do what works with you. So just plan around that, is that what I would say.
And the final advice I would have around mindset is, if social media is getting in your head, take a
Turn
little
it
bit
off.
of a break during peak week. I've seen people do this a lot, where they start spinning out. Oh, this person's going to be in my class, or I'm going to be up against this person. Oh my gosh, they look so good. And I mean, we get to the show, and like, that person may or may not have even been in a top call out. Keep in mind that social media is not reality. They're getting the best angle, the best lighting, the best everything. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. So sometimes just taking that break from social media can be helpful. Show day is a lot of hurry up and wait. So if you haven't competed before and haven't experienced this, you got to get there, hurry up, and make sure you're on time for the meeting, or make sure you're on time for this or that. And then you're going to a lot of times spend a lot of time backstage just waiting. Have something where you can relax, lay down, ideally prop your feet up. Even if you wanted to bring some sort of game, or if you've got a game on your phone that you can play, so you're not just scrolling on social media, which can be sometimes triggering for people. Just thinking about that, maybe even some nice relaxing music, something that's motivating for you. You can put your earphones in and just kind of relax. Anything that's going to help you keep your cortisol level, in check during show day is going to be really, really helpful and make the day more enjoyable. I know for us, we do our best to connect our athletes so they have each other and they can hang out and chit chat and, things like that. And a lot of times that can create a really positive experience. And so, they're making friends while they're also, keeping their minds off of, what can be daunting, which is I'm about to go step on stage and show all my hard work that I've been putting in for, X amount of months or years. So just a few other little tips on that one. And hopefully this has been really helpful. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to peak. But I think, we kind of covered a lot of the main ones that are really important. I just thought of one other. Water manipulation is on the top of my list. So that's going to be, controlling your sodium, controlling your water intake. And then we didn't talk at all about diuretics. I'm not a fan. It's very rare that I would suggest somebody use a diuretic. I mean, there are, over the counter things like dandelion root, things like that. Even vitamin C can a lot of times be used as a diuretic. And then there, of course, are like prescription diuretics as well, which, some of those can be really dangerous. So time and place, but for the most part, we want to control the water. And you talked a little bit about this, whether it be subcutaneous or intramuscular, we want to be able to push as much of that into the muscle as possible. So, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of using diuretics. Most of the time, it's going to flatten out the muscle. Well, you can't only pull subcutaneous water. It's going to pull out of the muscle too. So even though you might shrink wrap that skin a little closer to the muscle, if the muscle's also flat, you're not going to get the ultimate look you're going for. And that used to be something when I started competing, everybody got a diuretic. We all would do, the Expel was the popular one back then. And people would start weeks in advance, and then they would cut water, cut sodium, and then they were completely flat on show day. And then they were like, why did I not look as good on show day? And so that's why. So I did want to bring that one up. So water manipulation, nutrient manipulation, which we talked a bit about with your protein, carbs, and fats. We didn't talk a lot about fiber, but fiber is also one that I'll typically decrease at the very end. We don't want to decrease it coming in too soon because that might slow down the bowel movements and things like that, but that's a really important one too. So then we talked about nutrient manipulation. So that would be your protein, carbs, fats, as well as, I didn't mention fiber before. Fiber is something that I don't like to drop down till the very end, because sometimes if we drop it too early in peak week, the athlete can start to get constipated. I know it's funny. People are freaked out about fruit for some reason. I think because they think, oh, it's sugar, you can't have sugar. I like to keep fruit in because I do feel like that's really helps to keep, that regularity, so we don't start to feel like we're not going to the restroom like we should. So I think that pretty much covered it.
You talked a little bit about artificials too, and cutting those.
Cutting
Yeah,
artificials.
okay.
Yep. Thank you for reminding me. And then, of course, we talked about the mental aspects and how to keep cortisol levels low, planning ahead, staying in the present moment, focusing on the day at a time, surrounding yourself with people that are going to really help uplift you and help you. Maybe taking a little bit of time, if you can, away from work, giving yourself a little bit of a break, maybe pamper yourself a little bit during peak week.
And I think if we can just one pause on that, is that you've spent 12, 14, 16 weeks, and it's not just that time that you spend in prep, it's the time that you spent before prep, in that off season or that improvement season or whatever it was. You've spent years working that body. You're prepping for what is essentially going to be 5 to 10 minutes on stage. Make the most of that time, because that's what you're going to remember. So take the time to create conditions for success for yourself, and just plan ahead and think, what's going to make me happiest during this week? It's okay to be selfish a little bit during this time, and know what you need to do. So surrounding yourself with the right piece, a lot of the stuff that you just talked about, I think is really important.
All right. So just summarize, and just
we also didn't talk about kind of time management, but the more you can block out your time and really schedule things, setting alarms, reminders, especially for nutrient timing or for your supplements or other things like that. I mean, I know some people that struggle with water will set alarms throughout the day to make sure they're drinking their water.
right. And then the final point I wanted to make too, kind of talking about if you do want to get any kind of body work done during peak week, stay away from anything that could potentially cause inflammation, bruising, any of those kinds of things. Typically, what I feel like helps the most is like more of a lymphatic kind of drainage massage or just a relaxing kind of
Swedish
massage.
massage,
Yeah, Swedish massage. I know a lot of the athletes like to wear the boots, the compression boots that can help with some recovery. So kind of more focusing just on recovery and not so much like the tearing down of anything, because you don't want to be adding the inflammation during peak week. Just make sure you do all of that prior to
and
peak
no
week.
cupping peak week.
Right. Well, that would definitely be in the bruising category for sure, for sure. And there was more I wanted to cover during this episode. So I know that we ran out of time a while ago, and all this stuff is so important. So maybe we'll cover a few more things in the hack, and then we'll definitely have more episodes later on to continue to give you guys more information and things that you can apply.
Yeah, this is a big topic. It's hard to cover in the time that we have for the show. So we will come back to this, and then maybe we will cover a few of the things in the Fusion hack, as Jami said. So anything else you want to say before we bid
No,
everybody
I
adieu?
think we're good for this episode.
Okay, then peak yourself by liking, comment, subscribing, and leaving, like, comment, subscribe, leave your reviews. Help us help you, and please let us know how this content is resonating with you and what you'd like to see from us. And remember the 3 B's, which is
Be good to yourself.
be good to each other and be safe. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to FitBody Lifestyle. We hope today's episode has left you feeling motivated and equipped to tackle your fitness goals, business challenges, and the daily dance of life. Remember to value progress over perfection. Life's tough enough alone. Find the chosen family around you to help you along the way.
If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite streaming platform. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at FitBody Fusion.